Dortmund. Here, at the heart of the Ruhr district, there once were blast furnaces, foundry and rolling mill. More than 20,000 people once worked on the grounds of the Westfalen ironworks at Borsigplatz. But the ironworks were unprofitable and were closed down together with the steelworks and put up for sale. The Chinese steel group Shagang took an interest in this bargain. After all, second-hand plants are cheaper than new ones. The only problem: how does one transport 250,000 tons of material from Dortmund to China? Workshop supervisor Gernot Bahr had worked in the Westfalen ironworks for 30 years. He was there when the workers from the Celestial Empire made themselves at home and packed up his furnace. At the beginning, it wasn't really quite clear to us how the Chinese were going to work. All we saw was that dozens of them walked around and labeled all sorts of plants with their Chinese characters.
Anlagen dann beschriftet haben mit ihren chinesischen Schriftzeichen.
We were not amazed. Perhaps we didn't quite believe that it can work the way they planned it.
Dass es so funktionieren kann, wie die das vorhaben.
Within only 12 months, 800 Chinese people had disassembled the Westfalen ironworks and taken them away with them. The biggest industrial transport in history. The plants were reassembled in Zhangjiagang, not far from Shanghai. The city above the sea. Shanghai is the boom city of Asia. The quintessence of modern China, fast, loud and colorful. Just like the country as a whole, Shanghai has gone through some turbulent changes. The driving force behind such enormous economic growth is industry and the building trade, and both, more than anything, need iron and steel. No other country on earth uses and produces more of it than China does. 200 kilometers upstream the Yangtze River, the docks of the steel company Shagang. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. A 40,000-ton freighter arrives. It carries rust-colored soil from Australia, the material from which iron and steel are made, iron ore. The ore can be found almost all over the world. That is why it normally can be bought cheaply. But a worldwide fight for the best quality materials from Australia and Brazil has broken out. The prices have risen steeply because the demand in China continues to grow. 1/3 of the iron ore worldwide now goes to the Celestial Empire. Shovelfuls of dusty soil are loaded onto conveyor belts and are distributed across the huge storage grounds of the steel company. A few hours later. Like every morning, Mr. Cao walks the 300 meters from his flat to the main entrance of Shagang. Cao is one of 10,000 people now employed by the huge steel company. And new people are being employed all the time. The first few weeks, the new arrivals have to march to work in lockstep. Discipline is greatly valued in China. At great speed, Shagang developed from a small company to a powerful private steel producer. Thanks to the plants from Dortmund, it continues to grow with no end in sight. There are two ways of producing steel. Either iron ore is melted to make pig iron and then hardened to make steel. Or the steel is made from scrap metal. Mr. Cao supervises a furnace that produces steel from scrap iron. 40% of steel worldwide are produced that way. No other metal is recycled even nearly as much. Carefully, women crane operators load the metal scrap buckets before they are taken to the melting furnace. The right choice in distribution is very important for Cao and his people to be able to melt good steel. Mr. Cao is currently plagued by worries. Like all raw materials for steel production, scrap is in short supply. That is why Mr. Cao inspects the scrap storage every morning before briefing his people and checking the furnace. This scrap is of quite bad quality. It contains a lot of copper because it is scrap from old electrical equipment. The steel is very thin there. It is already an end product. It is hardly worth reusing it. On the one hand, resources are scarce, and on the other, prices are high. That is why we have to use this bad scrap anyway. The price for scrap has gone up by a huge amount, by 20 to 30 euros per ton in the last few months alone. There should really be much more scrap here. Mr. Cao needs supplies for the turn of the year, because there won't be any fresh supplies at that time for 2 weeks. The scrap is delivered by lorry, but mostly by ship. Most of the small scrap barges are family businesses. The ship is their home. They collect the scrap in the provinces and transport it to the steel company. During the Chinese New Year celebration, these small companies go on holiday. Captain Ju also delivers scrap with his ship. He has already delivered his cargo. Now he goes to one of the islands outside Shanghai in the Yangtze Delta to collect fresh goods. He has been working on barges for more than 30 years. He has personally experienced the ups and downs of Chinese politics. The economic reforms began in the 80s and 90s. The reforms have finally given us the opportunity to work independently. A colleague and I then bought the ship ourselves. We have turned from a collective to a proper private company. This time, Captain Ju gets very high-quality scrap. But still, the ship does not make him rich. Of the 1,000 euros that he can earn per month, he needs 1/2 for the ship. The rest he shares with his partner. That leaves just over 200 euros for himself. That is enough to feed his family. Today, small private businesses like that of the scrap captain contribute a great deal to the economic power of China. At that time, I thought, now we have a completely new political power. If I buy a ship now, I am responsible for myself. When I work a lot, I can earn more and my life gets better. That is how I imagined it. The economic changes of the past 2 decades were most profitable for the towns on China's east coast. Most of all for Shanghai. Thousands of multi-story buildings were built here in the past 10 years. Everything old is pulled down and rebuilt. There is no end in sight for the building boom. In many western Chinese provinces, the economic revival has yet to materialize. In China, the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger. Millions of people therefore move from the rural areas to the rich east. 5 kilometers from the tower blocks of the Shanghai Commercial Center. Fisherman Pei is at work. Drive over there. Mr. Pei is not after fish. He fishes for scrap. Every day his cousin takes him to the Huang Pool in his little wooden boat. There Mr. Pei casts his magnet. The fisherman and his cousin, together with their wives, arrived from the poorer province of Anhui, further inland, to make their fortune in the east. Nothing stuck. I arrived in Shanghai 7 years ago to fish for eels. But now there are almost no eels here anymore. That is why I stopped fishing and started collecting scrap. On a good day, I can catch 50 kilograms. On a bad day, it's only 5 kilograms. Pei can sell 1 kilogram of scrap for 2 yuan, about 20 cents. So he makes about 80 euros per month. Pei's magnet would be able to hoist up to 200 kilograms, but it is usually only small metal parts that are thrown into the river during ship repair works. We do it early in the morning, at lunchtime, and late at night, whenever the police is not working. When they work, we stop, because it is not really allowed. Pei and his cousin often fish late at night, when there is the least risk of getting caught. For their work to be worth it, they have to make quite a big catch this evening. "40 tons of scrap metal are charged into Mr. Sao's scrap furnace. More than fisherman Pei can fish for in 2 years. Here, in the so-called electric arc furnace, new steel is made from scrap and additives. Supervisor Sao is proud of his furnace, which has been in operation for a long time, before the plants from Dortmund arrived. My furnace was the first one of its type in all of Asia, and the 6th of its kind worldwide. Some of the scrap is preheated here, which means that we can melt steel at great speed. The next load of scrap will be heated in a special shaft of Mr. Sao's furnace and put into the furnace bit by bit. This saves valuable time and energy. Now the scrap furnace begins its real work. The enormous and still glowing electrodes are lowered into the furnace and the arc is ignited. A continuous electrical discharge between the electrodes and the scrap produces heat of more than 3,000 degrees and an unbelievable noise. I started working here 14 years ago. When I heard this noise for the first time, I felt like running away. But now it's like that. When we don't hear the noise while we work, it is really strange. Without the noise, we don't feel comfortable anymore. For as long as the furnace is working properly, I really like hearing the noise. For people from outside, it is noise, but for us, it's a sign that everything is working well. The smelting process takes about 40 minutes. So that it is faster, and in order to save energy, Sao blows a supply of pure oxygen into the furnace through a lens that is mounted on the side. Through the arc's extreme heat and the pure oxygen, the scrap gradually becomes molten. The smelting process in the electric arc furnace uses an enormous amount of energy. This is a problem in China because energy capacities lag behind ever-growing demand. Finally, the first molten slag runs out at the side. It floats on top of the steel because it is lighter. The slag contains those substances that ended up in the furnace together with the scrap and that would contaminate the steel. Once the scrap has become liquid, the workers have to take a sample. An unpleasant job because the temperature next to the furnace is more than 100 degrees. The samples are immediately analyzed in the laboratory. Only once the mixture is right, the cover of the furnace will be opened. Then 100 tons of crude steel can be tapped. Despite his routine at the furnace, when Mr. Sao looks back on the rapid changes that have taken place in the steel company over the past few years, he can sometimes hardly believe it himself. I really must say that we in the steel company are developing unbelievably fast. But these constant changes also mean that we are under some significant pressure. We didn't have molten pig iron. Now we have the blast furnaces from Dortmund and the large foundry and all the other processes for producing steel. Suddenly we have all that. For us, that means that we have to continue to learn. Every day at 11:30 a.m. on the dot, they have a break from learning and working. Then it is lunchtime in the steel company and in the rest of China. For an hour and a half, they forget all about steel and iron, and Mr. Cao is looking forward to that. He who eats is a king, says a Chinese proverb. Eating is a favorite activity in the People's Republic and a matter of importance. People put up with a 7-day working week and low wages, but to cancel lunch would be simply unforgivable. The two blast furnaces from Dortmund do not process scrap. Here, iron ore is smelted into iron. Once a day, safety manager Liu has to climb on top of the two furnaces. They extend almost 100 meters into the sky. When the waste gases do not block it too much, this affords Liu an impressive view over the steel company and the Yangtze River. The company's premises cover an area of more than 14 square kilometers, and it is continuously being expanded. We are on top of the second furnace. It has been in operation for only 1 month. Every morning I have to check whether the equipment up here all works faultlessly. Because of the blast furnace gases, we always have to come up here in pairs. It can be very dangerous. The machine room has to be checked as well. The massive cable drums on which the conveyor cages are suspended are powered from here. They are used to transport the iron ore, which was delivered by ship to the top, and to pour it into the blast furnace. There, oxygen is extracted from it. This, above all, requires coke. Once the iron ore and the coke are in the furnace, it is almost impossible to influence what goes on inside. Then, the quality of the pig iron has essentially already been determined. At the foot of the blast furnace, final preparations for the tapping, when the hot pig iron pours out of the furnace. Slowly, the drill is driven in front of the tap hole. Almost all the workers here are young and inexperienced. None of them has ever worked with such a large blast furnace. As a result of the steel boom, experienced workers are rare. After a short while, the drill seized up. Safety manager Liu cannot help, but the workers know what to do now. They have to help the process along with the oxygen lance. Pure oxygen is blown into the tap hole to clear the way for the pig iron. A hard job for the workers. The heat next to the tap hole is enormous, and then there's the hail of sparks from the burning oxygen. But still, for protection, normal outdoor shoes, overalls, and a towel in front of your face have to be sufficient. A small opening has been made. Now the drill has to finish opening the tap hole. Finally, the 1,500-degree hot pig iron gushes into the tapping spout. Nothing much is left of the drill itself. The pig iron absorbs a lot of carbon in the blast furnace. It is brittle and difficult to process. That is why the pig iron is later hardened into steel in a next step. After the pig iron, the lighter slag pours from the tap hole. It is used for road building or for cement. Liu and his people have to constantly make sure that the spout does not get blocked and the red-hot stream does not burst its banks. Unblock the spout over there. Every time the same. Everything must go away. It's too much in that place. It's piling up more and more. Back with barge captain Ju. His ship is fully loaded by now. Together with other scrap transporters, he is just waiting for the lock to open so that he can set off. There is a lot of competition in his business. The return is low. Sometimes he thinks about whether this line of work is still worth doing. Of course, it is very difficult to drive such a ship at my age. If there was another option, I would like to do it, but it is my trade after all. I have been doing it for decades already. And I also believe that if politics continues the way it is now, then we here in China have a bright future ahead of us. The lock is open. Captain Ju sets off with his cargo of scrap. He has a day's journey upstream the Yangtze River ahead of him. This is one of the most fertile regions in China. Here, every spare square meter is used for intense agriculture. Only a fraction of China's area is suitable for the cultivation of grain and rice at all, too little for its 1.3 billion inhabitants. The People's Republic already has to import a lot of grain, but industrialization is flourishing, particularly along the banks of the Yangtze River. Today, an enormous number of industrial parks, power stations and docks gather along the last 300 kilometers to the mouth of the river near Shanghai. China is investing a lot to improve infrastructure. Soon, you will never be further than 20 kilometers away from a motorway. That way, more and more arable land disappears under reinforced concrete. Near Nanjing, a few hundred kilometers away from Shanghai. Early in the morning, the workers set off to drive their boats to the middle of the Yangtze River. They are building one of the monumental bridges across the river. Most of the world's big bridge projects are currently being planned in China. Mr. Tang is responsible for one of the two support columns. Today the weather is good, and so he wants to put up 2 more steel parts with his people. The support column will be 1.5 times as high as the Cologne Cathedral. This is the northern part of the Nanjing Bridge. It's the first time that we are building a bridge with steel columns in China. The design follows the shape of the Eiffel Tower. At the same time, it is also the Chinese character for human being. All steel structures here are bent. That makes it quite a difficult structure, and we only work with the latest technologies. First of all, project manager Tang checks the tool steel objects. The pre-assembled parts were delivered by ship the night before. Both of them are more than 10 meters high and weigh 150 tons. The parts can be lifted to the top column only by crane. Working with this crane involves quite a risk. The crane loads, sways and swings easily. That is one of the main problems of our work. We can only work when wind forces are low. Today, there is almost no wind at the top of the crane. It gives a good view of the Yangtze River. It is China's lifeline and one of the longest and busiest rivers in the world. For the Chinese, it symbolizes their country. After a 20-minute ascent through the inside of the column, project manager Teng arrives at the top. 20 workers have to install the new steel part on a few square meters. Lifting it is a slow process. It will take at least 1.5 hours until it is up here. On the ground below, the ties are being loosened. Slowly, the crane driver lifts the first part. He must be very careful. The heavy weight of the steel object means that the crane ropes can easily start swaying or get out of control. Back with scrap fisherman Pei in Shanghai. He has had enough for today. It was a miserable catch, like so often recently. Pei and his cousin are not officially registered in Shanghai and therefore have no social security at all. It is still almost impossible in China to become registered anywhere other than your hometown. But because there is a lot of unemployment in many provinces and the peasant's income is minimal, millions move to the richest cities nonetheless. There, they are tolerated as cheap laborers for economic growth. Boats are all over the river now. A few years ago, there were no ships here at all. There are a few ships that collect what we have fished out of the water. They take the scrap to the steel factories and sell it on. They are the middlemen. Mr. Pei and his cousin want to know what their colleagues have managed to collect and stop by a middleman. Unfortunately, there is less and less scrap around. All those who used to fish for eel are now coming here to fish for scrap. Soon, there will be no scrap at all in the water. A box full of rusty pieces of metal. That is the catch of the many scrap fishermen today. Pei and his cousin drive home. Some have given up already and returned home. They only come here when it's eel season. But there is less and less to catch. When there is no more scrap, then we just have to find work on dry land. Soon there will be no more work on the water. Mr. Pei does not just have to feed himself and his wife. His 6-year-old son lives at home with his grandparents. He has just started school. The scrap fisherman has to pay for the school fees and meals. For the Chinese, a good education has top priority. Every year he tries to send a few hundred euros home. Often it is half of what he earns. His cousin had a son just under a year ago. For as long as he is not at school yet, he can live with him on the ship. Then the child has to go back home. In Shanghai, the school fees would be much higher because their son is not officially registered. Too much for the scrap fishermen. Back at the Nanjing Bridge, the steel part has now almost arrived at the top of the column. The workers are getting more tense. Slowly, the 150 tons of steel are put into position. Half of the workers are standing inside and the other half outside at the edge. Stop for a minute. Stop it. Careful in there. A bit to the left. Everybody inside, be careful. A bit higher. Suddenly, one corner tilts to one side. Stop, stop, stop. Everything okay in there? Carry on. Lower still. Millimeter by millimeter, the steel part is lowered. The narrow upper and lower edges must fit each other perfectly. Even a tiny deviation can have devastating consequences for the statics of the entire bridge. It fits. Manager Tang and his people are relieved. Now the steel part will just need to be secured using hundreds of bolts and screws. Back at the steel company Shagan, the massive metal ladles which are used to transport liquid pig iron and hot steel have to be kept at a consistent temperature. Mr. Shen has a long way to his place of work high above the ladles and the converters. Great heat and bad air are part of his job. Mr. Shen is a crane driver at the Shagang Steel Company. Like almost everything here, also Shen's equipment came from Dortmund 2 years ago. That had certain advantages. When I started here, the conditions weren't very good. The de-dusting plants were bad. Today, even the cranes have air conditioning. The employees' working conditions have improved quite a lot. Here at the steelworks, the pig iron arrives from the blast furnace. It is still liquid. The crane driver transports the full ladles to large steel containers, the converters. There, the pig iron is converted into steel. Now we have the pig iron on the hook and are on our way to the second converter. While working, one always has to watch the colleagues on the ground to make sure there are no accidents. The converter moves while I charge the pig iron, and I have to direct the ladle with this movement so that nothing gets spilled. That is the most important thing in my work. Mr. Shen has been there for 20 years, and he is famous for his steady hand. So far, he has never spilled anything. Slowly, he pours the liquid pig iron into the massive steel container. The converter can process more than 200 tons in one go. While the converter is being put upright again, crane driver Shen drives back and fetches the next ladle of pig iron. Several converters operate in parallel. That is the only way to process the huge amounts of pig iron from the blast furnaces. The gates close in front of the filled converter. Now the so-called refining processes begin. Oxygen is blown into the converter at great pressure in order to burn out excess carbon and other unwanted substances. Finally, pig iron turns into steel. After 8 hours in the crane, Mr. Shen packs in. And that is just as well, because like most workers at Shagang, he works 7 days a week. The factory develops, the more we earn. Our standard of living is getting better and better. The flats used to be quite bad. I have now been working in this factory for 20 years, and meanwhile we have built our own houses. 20 years ago, there was only farmland around here and small houses made of wood and loam. Today, the houses are made from reinforced concrete and stone, and they have to be large. Like almost everybody here, crane driver Shen comes from a peasant family. His 70-year-old mother-in-law is still out on the field every day. You can go home. You don't need to work here anymore. These are simply tiles, and these are steel windows. The steel for these window frames and the steel for the building is from Shagang. That is our steel. We bought these windows ourselves. We have had them made in a workshop. It took us about 2 months to build this house. Although some rooms are still empty, Shen is proud of his 250 square meters. The liquid steel from crane driver Shen's converter must quickly be poured into the casting machine. Workers add casting powder in order to improve the metal's surface. Inside the plant, the steel is shaped and at the same time significantly cooled down. At the bottom, the shaped and still red-hot steel comes out as an infinite strand. It is then cut into so-called steel slabs. The slabs, which weigh tons, are currently in great demand worldwide. Shagang's customers are all after these specimens. Slabs are rolled into plates and steel sheet, which will eventually turn into cars and tins, ships and fridges. The steel from Mr. Sao's furnace also needs to be cast, but here everything is a size smaller. Mr. Sao likes watching the red-hot metal while it cools down. The cooling water is very important for the quality of the steel. I like this place very much. It is like a free sauna for me. I watch it every day. Mr. Sao's casting plant does not produce slabs. It produces so-called billets, beams made from steel. 6 red-hot strands emerge from the plant simultaneously. They are also cut into individual parts. Then they are transported to the steel mill next door. The steel beams are heated up once again in order to make them more malleable. Then the steel is put through several rollers that exert enormous pressure on the metal. Gradually, the thick beam turns into thin wire. The narrower the steel beam, the quicker the process. In the end, it races through the rolling plants at 160 kilometers per hour. The beam has turned into 9 kilometers of long wire. There are many uses for the wire from Shagang. It is used for reinforced concrete or woven into cables for bridges and cranes. Every so often, Mr. Sao pops into the wire store to see what happens to all the scrap that ends up in his furnace. He finds it difficult to imagine that China will need less steel one day. Sao is optimistic about the future of his country. Of course, I can't say exactly how the Chinese economy stands worldwide. I can't judge that. I am not sure about that. But I would say that in 20 years we will double our economic output. That is the minimum. the highest television tower in Asia, the most modern airport in China, the Transrapid. All that was created within the last 10 years in Shanghai alone. Much of it was built with steel from Shagan. For the 2010 World Fair, an entire district will be pulled down and built from scratch. An enormous deep-sea harbor is also being built. The People's Republic is now the third largest trading nation in the world. China wants to become the economic power of the 21st century. The speed at which things change and the general optimism in China are impressive. Nobody quite knows, however, whether the country will manage the leap from the 19th into the 21st century within only a few decades. After a long day, Mr. Cao is happy to be at home at last. As usual, he walks the few hundred meters from his work to his home. Mr. Cao has done his work for the day, but at the steelworks and in the rest of the country, the work goes on. Gernot Bahr has come to terms with the fact that the steel is now being produced in Zhangjiagang and no longer in Dortmund. So I try to hand over the plant to the Chinese as best as possible. I should think it won't have been the last steelwork and the last furnace to close down somewhere. It goes on like that. Who knows which way? That's how it is.